Where's Brian? Come sit with me. Brian Carver, come sit with me.
It would, especially in this area. And especially if you can go and say,
Okay.
I mean, all we do now is we have a few stations and we average 30.
The phone call is
So
working.
we don't
That's
actually
good.
know what the English ending in the neighborhood on any
Okay.
given corridor.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We'll probably still have people trickle in a little bit. We have a few people just walking in. Thank you for coming. This is a meeting that's been a long time in the making. So I'm sure that you guys have all been wondering. We've talked a lot about our regional planning, and so today we're going to be able to see what our regional teams have come up with. So first of all, can we just do really quick introductions for the meeting minutes? Let's start at the table, and then we'll go back to the back room. Brian.
Good morning. I'm Brian Carver with Bear River Association of Governments.
Amy Parker with Utah Broadband Project.
Ryan Marriott with Americom Technology.
Dave Ryan with Strata Networks. Tyler Rasmussen with Strata. Brent Simmons with Strata.
Glenn Reichert, US Ignite, the public-private partnership.
Ray Timothy, Utah Education Network.
Willis Kenner, Comcast.
Greg Bob, Tegra.
Roger Timmerman, Vivid Wireless.
Jared Pantier, Utopia.
Shari Chambers with Zayo. Chelsea Peshman, the Broadband Project.
Let's go to John.
John Hardy with the Commission and also part of the Broadband Project.
Jim Forrest, Entry.
Okay.
Paul Allen with Mount Pleasant Association of Government.
Cody Christensen with the Association of Government.
Louise Davenport with the Welfare Center of Company.
Soren Simonson at the Community Studio working with government overseas.
Amy Peters with the Southeastern Utah Association of Local Governments.
My name is Emily Polilonjuma, it's Southeastern Association of Government. Levi Roberts, Lifetime Association of Government.
Deborah Meyer with USDA.
Jason Ivey with USDA.
Terrence Bright on City Business Development.
Jeff Enholt with Denver Office of Economic Development.
Diane Bradshaw with Communications. Sarah Slauson with Utah North Association.
Great, thank you. Okay, so so this meeting is formatted a little bit differently than a lot of our other meetings. We've taken out a lot of our usual things. We're not doing a map of the month this time. We wanted to focus exclusively on the regional planning teams. But I did have just two quick announcements. I had sent out an email to the Advisory Council probably about a month ago. The USDA has released a notice that they are doing the Community Connect grants again this year. The Community Connect grants are utilized to provide funding for broadband infrastructure. They're mostly targeted at areas that have essentially no service. And I realize that in Utah it's very difficult to find areas, but there may be a few areas that may qualify. And we've been sort of looking at if there are small communities. And if, Jesse, do you know if you guys have determined specific areas, or are you still kind of
I know
working on
there's
that?
4 for sure.
Okay.
It kind of depends on how you interpret the guidelines.
Okay, so what we'll probably do is we'll look through our data and we'll try and get a feel for where those communities would be, and then reach out to any providers that would be in the area and just let them know if they would like to try and go after any of that funding. They have also released a NOFA for the distance learning and telemedicine grants. Both of the grants, the applications close on July 7th, so it's a pretty short time frame to get things together. The distance learning and telemedicine grants provide funding for a few things: equipment, inside wiring. They could be useful in some tribal communities. I know that I've heard in the past that there are some chapter houses that have had issues with internal wiring and things. And so if you think that there are some things that could be funded, we definitely encourage you to apply for grants. We'd like to see as much money coming into Utah as we can. So, and if you have any questions, just get a hold of us, and we're happy to have our mapping team help to look at areas and see what current service is available. So with that, we're going to move right into our program. I just wanted to give a brief introduction of the history of the regional planning teams, why we decided to do them. So about the last couple of years, under the terms of our grant, we originally had some funding to do a public awareness campaign. And Tara Tui, the former project manager, and I spent a lot of time talking about, what would be the most useful things for the state to do as far as helping to encourage broadband deployment, broadband adoption. And once we had gotten into the program and once we had started doing research, we determined that, our broadband adoption rate is the highest in the country. It's very high. It's hard to find people in Utah that are not using the internet. The recent survey that we did with non-adopters kind of confirmed that the numbers are very small. We talked to many of the providers, a lot of them in the rural areas, and asked them if they could identify specific target areas with groups of people that weren't using the internet. And we were just having a hard time finding small groups of people that aren't using the internet. They seem to be dispersed throughout the population. And we determined that, using the funding that we had to do kind of a widespread awareness campaign on using the internet probably wasn't going to accomplish the goals that we had in the project. So we spent quite a bit of time working with the Public Service Commission to determine what we could do with the funding that we had, if we could transition that to something else. So Tara and I went through a lot of rounds with the Public Service Commission, and we decided that we wanted to do a regional broadband planning effort. Other states had done a similar effort, and we thought it would be a really good opportunity to take the knowledge base that we had on a state level, the relationships that we've developed with the providers, and to work with local communities to educate them on broadband, particularly how is broadband deployed, how does the industry work, and to have people in local communities that are more informed on the industry. We thought that would be a really good use of the project funding. And so we talked a lot about who should we contract. We thought about hiring a contractor, but we decided that we really wanted to give funding to groups that would stay at least in place in organizations throughout the state. And so the associations of governments, when we talked about it, those groups made the most sense because they work on similar types of grants. They do a lot of planning efforts, and we felt like that we could reach out to the different AOGs. They're already organized, so the state is already divided into teams. And so we approached them and asked them if they'd be interested. So we issued grants to all of the associations of governments last summer. And what we told them was, we want you to organize regional planning teams. We want you to go through a process where you reach out to different sectors, ask them what the needs are, ask them what the strengths are, the weaknesses. And then from that information, we want you to gather information, and we want you to give us your top priorities. We realize that with a year time frame, you can't delve into every issue, but we think that each region can do a lot of outreach, and you can come up with what you think are the most important things in your region. And so they were required to have about at least 6 meetings with their local teams. We wanted the local teams to be comprised of different industry sectors. And we also wanted to have providers participate. One of the things that we've learned on the state level is that the coordination between especially government agencies and the private sector has been really important in deploying broadband in Utah. And so we wanted to make sure that those relationships extended out into the rural communities. And it also was a good way to help educate a lot of our regional coordinators on some of the industry issues, having them sit down and talk to providers about what their barriers were, and then talk to the communities about what the needs are. And so, so today what we're going to do is we're going to have each of the regions give a presentation, and we've asked them to focus mostly on what the recommendations are. They all went through a similar process, but we want to get right to the things that they thought were most important and things that they learned while they were implementing their regional planning teams. So with that, I think, Brian, are you first on this? So Brian Carver out of the Bear River Association of Governments, he was tasked with being the coordinator of the coordinators. So he's helped us a lot with getting everything organized, doing some administrative tasks. And so he's kind of our key person to reach out to the other AOGs. So we're going to start with him, and then we'll move on to the other areas.
Thank you. That's okay. Thank you, Kelly. Yeah, we've, at the Associations of Government, we've been very pleased to be involved in this process. I was talking with Bob Allen a second ago. This is something that a lot of us never really thought we'd be doing in our career paths, and so it's been kind of an exciting diversion. Although that's probably not the best way to put it.
We can't hear very well remotely, by the way, if you can hear me.
And internet access is tied to so many different things in community economics, development, education, healthcare, all of the different priorities and issues that you've already outlined as a council that tie so much together in our region. It's been an exciting process to work through with our elected officials and our community leaders and business leaders and specialists in these different areas. Just to keep this short, I just wanted to briefly touch on the regional goals that we identified in the Bear River region, which is the northernmost 3 counties here in Utah. I don't think our goals are going to be substantially different from anything else you're going to hear from the other groups, but just very quickly, certainly, we want to be able to access information and high-speed data for economic opportunity, and we wanted to look for ways within our region that we could improve communication and with local governments to reduce unnecessary regulation and look for opportunities where public investment in infrastructure and other resources might be appropriate to expand access to these services. Certainly, access to healthcare is a big issue in rural areas, and being able to utilize this technology is a high priority for our communities. We wanted to promote education and awareness of broadband services. What can they provide? Who provides it? Where can we get it? Things like that. And we really appreciate the residential demand surveys that the state's done. We're looking at a couple of other activities in the region to continue building our awareness, and of course, just increasing overall access within our communities to the information services that broadband can deliver, primarily or especially in low income and other special needs. The recommendations that we came up with from our region were to continue to collect information, particularly on business needs. We're going to conduct some surveys in our area that will gather additional data and details on what particular segments of our business community need. We have a great data set on residential adoption, and we're just looking to continue to build on that, find ways that we can grow that economic opportunity in our areas. We will continue the identification of hard infrastructure needs, like looking at gaps in service, looking at ways that we can coordinate and cooperate between different agencies on implementing infrastructure, and of course looking for ways to fund and incentivize expansion of in-the-ground systems. A key priority in healthcare idea that came up was to advocate for regulatory changes. There are issues with privacy and insurance coverage that are at hand in delivering remote healthcare services via broadband technology. We believe that the state in particular is in a good position to be an advocate for change and streamlining those regulations and policies individuals. And then finally, we're looking for ways to improve public access points such as schools and libraries and other places where the public in general can access either wireless or wired services for a variety of reasons. With UEN and other networks, we have great coverage. Even in some of our most rural communities, there is service available. In fact, I can't think of any place in my region where we don't have one or two service providers that are active. The key is making sure that we can find ways for the public to access those services. So. As a group, as a region, we just plan on continuing these conversations. We have a regional broadband advisory council in place that will continue to meet and discuss these issues, as well as bring them up in other forums. We are currently working with the Utah Telehealth Network and some in-home nonprofit service providers on developing a pilot program to deliver certain healthcare services. We're looking seriously at the grants that Kelly mentioned on acquiring the technology and the equipment necessary to visit people in their homes and provide medical services over the internet. We think it'll be a great benefit if we can work out the funding and privacy and other issues. We'll keep people from the necessity of having to travel long distances for routine services, just helping improve that quality of life. We're looking at developing some informational materials with local service providers, chambers of commerce, and other groups on making information available to the public on what services are available and what helping people understand what broadband can do for them, what level of service they might need, and where they can get that. And then, of course, we'll continue advocacy of these issues in our conversations with local planning processes. Are there any questions?
Okay. One thing, I think each of the regions has a few things that are unique, and I think that your work with some of the telehealth issues, I think that's going to be really interesting to watch as you move forward, and we'd like to see how it develops, and hopefully other areas of the state can use that as a model, once you've accomplished your goals. So
we hope so. We're excited to find some parties that are willing to help us take advantage of that opportunity. We'll certainly share whatever we can learn.
And I think too, I know that in one of your meetings you talked about public access points, and especially for low-income populations, those are really critical. And even there was a little bit of discussion about having some sort of facility where businesses could come and use computers and things for economic development purposes, which I thought was really great.
Yeah, we have a couple of people that are excited about kind of, we call them business incubators, areas that have service available. There's a library in Garden City in Rich County that has public Wi-Fi access that has been used frequently for economic activities. People come in and they look stuff on eBay, or engage in other activities over the internet that allow them to bring income into their community. Yeah. One last thing. We learned to always have a backup plan. A couple of years ago in our area, we had construction that severed both fiber optic lines running into Cache County, which we had systemic redundancy, but not geographic redundancy. And so, we're proud to say that we've been able to address that. But this is just one of the jokes that we had running around the neighborhood. Was, always make sure that you've got a good secondary system in place.
Thank you. Okay.
right. Well, my name is Bob Allen. I'm a planner with Mountain Land Association of Governments, and like Brian and I were talking about, at Mountain Lands, probably our primary business that we work in is transportation planning. So if you're driving down through Utah County and you enjoy the freeway or take commuter rail or so forth, that's our primary activity that we deal with. But we also end up doing a lot of different kinds of planning as well, some land use planning, and it's a lot of different things that we've ended up doing, hazard mitigation planning, interoperability, emergency communications planning, broadband planning, and so now I'm just thinking, wow, I wonder what the next plan that I have no knowledge of that I'm going to end up trying to plan for. And broadband planning is definitely one of those that was not in my specific wheelhouse, and so there was a pretty steep learning curve. But we were really grateful for the opportunity to learn more and to work with Kelly and her team and bring a little more awareness to the issue in our region. Just some brief background information about us that kind of drives what our plan entails. We're, again, Wasatch, Utah, and Wasatch and Summit counties. Interesting information, population, a 2010 census, you can see the county populations with a total of about 579,000 people. Well, fast forward 30 years to 2040, projections show Summit, Wasatch, and Utah counties will all essentially double in population in the next 30 years. So we're growing fast. Faster than just about anybody in the nation, and we're going to grow a lot. And we've actually just completed some market analysis that Utah County could even exceed the growth that's already projected. So we're growing fast. How does that integrate into broadband planning? Well, it starts with mapping, obviously, and we loved working with AGRC and the great data that was provided for us. Corey Iman in our office is our GIS and cartography specialist, and he put together maps for each county specifically. These are the three primary types of maps. Technology of transmission, so what kind of fiber or whatever the case may be is in the ground to delivering the service. What's the wireless broadband coverage, and then wired broadband coverage. And if you look at that, essentially the warmer the color, the better off or the higher speeds we're looking at. So our kind of goal with this is we want to see red. We want to get the red across all of those areas. Same maps for Wasatch County, you can see, and then Summit County as well. A little bit more background information about us. Our adoption and availability is actually some of the highest in the state. You see, as far as households with speeds at or above 25, Summit County's at 91, Utah County's 95, and Wasatch County's 82. And I think a big portion of why Wasatch County is probably that low is because we have a relatively large population of people that live kind of in cabin, rural area, more recreational areas, and we kind of assume that is why that number is so low. But relative to a lot of places in the states, that's still very high. We put together our regional broadband council that we had a pretty good cross section, we felt, of different people. We had a lot of policymakers, elected officials, county commissioners, mayors of cities, IT staff, planning staff, economic development people, and obviously providers as well. So we had a pretty good cross-section, we thought, but you can see there's a lot of local government involvement there, and I think that is another reason our plan is driven towards local government. As we started out, we started obviously with the statewide priorities that you developed, education, agriculture, so on and so forth. We obviously felt those were very important and wanted to come up with some action items for us that we could help kind of bolster that, support those. Obviously, support the Utah Broadband Advisory Council and increase local government awareness and participation in it. I think, if you went to all the commissions and city councils and mayors and so forth in our area, I would assume 98% have, until this plan, had no idea this group even existed, and that people were actually trying to plan for broadband on a statewide and regional area. So we wanted to increase people's awareness of activities like this, and then obviously funding is a big issue. We want to definitely work with GOED to identify funding for future projects such as this, because we felt it was very, very useful. Branching off from the state, we went kind of more to the regional needs and did a regional needs assessment. And as we went through just brainstorming, starting off from scratch, some of the initial results or things that people said were important were up here: quality of service, accessibility, cost, infrastructure development, partnerships, both private-private, public-private, public safety, education, and federal lands, meaning getting infrastructure through federal lands in a quick and cost-effective way. So we took all that information and we really tried to boil it down to all these different issues, and what we essentially came down to the fact that was the overarching issue that was important to our region is we really want to facilitate the expansion of infrastructure and the highest level of infrastructure, really, fiber optic cable or whatever the best is, throughout the Mountainland region. We want to get the infrastructure out as quickly and cost efficiently as possible. And that kind of gets broken down into two different issues. Remember, we're a quickly growing community. One is the installation of new conduit or fiber as development occurs. We address that quite a bit in our plan, as well as expansion of infrastructure within developed communities where existing infrastructure is already in place, the costs significantly go up, and so how are we going to deal with these two different kinds of situations? The objectives that we boiled that down to try and accomplish those are education and prioritization, and I'll talk a little bit more about each one of these. Increased coordination and cooperation, funding, and then also kind of on the end, we definitely want to market existing infrastructure. So education and prioritization. The issue that essentially kept coming up was broadband service has essentially been a private enterprise up to this point. It's not, there hasn't been a lot of government involvement in it, and so there has been very little local planning. If you look at cities' general plans or infrastructure plans, especially if to a medium or a smaller community, those communities that are actually growing the fastest, if you found the word broadband in that plan, I would be surprised. And so what we wanted to accomplish with this is get the word out that, hey, at a local government level, when you're planning developments, when you're looking at infrastructure, when you're doing the things that you do on a regular basis, we want you to think broadband as well. Just like you're worried about the gas line, you're worried about the power lines, we want you to worry about broadband infrastructure, wherever the case may be. So some of the local action items that we want to work on is develop broadband-specific language for local plans. A lot of the communities, again, you go to them and say, okay, well, you need to talk more about broadband in your plan, and they're like, well, what do we talk about? What do we need to do? And so we wanted to kind of develop boilerplate language to kind of help get the juices flowing and allow communities to decide how they want to adopt and integrate that into their own local planning. Also, we want to work with the Mountainland Economic Development District to identify and update community and business network needs. So we want to understand what the needs are on a ongoing basis, and then obviously we'll work with local chambers of commerce to coordinate education and adoption efforts. There's a lot of people out there that rely on broadband, as you all know very well, but if they're anything like me, they're just like, okay, I expect it to be there, and they don't understand all the planning and issues and costs that go into that. So we want to try and bring their level of understanding up for that. Increased coordination and cooperation. This is, again, driven not solely, but primarily on our large growth. We're growing so quickly, and with a lot of growth, rapid growth, I should say, a lot of new infrastructure is put in place, and a lot of infrastructure is being upsized. So we're talking water, sewer, roads, electrical lines. You know, all these systems are being upgraded, put into the ground. And so we felt like there's a lot of opportunities to make sure we're sharing costs, we're coordinating. So if the sewer company district is going in to open a line, are the broadband providers being notified early enough that if they want to or can share right-of-way, is the transportation term, if they can share costs in that, we want to make sure that coordination is done. And so, so some of the local action items we've looked at: develop model infrastructure zoning and notification requirements that improve coordination with broadband developers, identify a list of community priority locations in coordination with local plans and economic development organizations. Again, this is the land use planner in me that's saying, hey, we want to identify maybe some of the green infrastructure, or that's maybe a planning term you don't. Virgin territory that we know we're going to need high speed. Maybe we have business planned there or offices planned in a certain location. We want to identify those and communicate that information so that the providers know, hey, we're going to want bigger infrastructure or in this location, so they're aware ahead of time. And then facilitate regional or local coordination meetings with service providers. Again, this goes especially to the medium or smaller communities. Especially smaller communities, they probably don't even know the people they need to know when it comes to broadband providers. Funding, this is a big issue for us. Many communities, especially existing developed communities, want to upgrade their broadband infrastructure, and the cost of infrastructure development and expansion, especially in developed communities, is significant. It's very significant. And the answer is, we don't know. I had the mayor of Orem say, okay, you missed out one thing. How are we going to pay for all this? And he was waiting for an answer, and I don't know if anybody knows the answer to this, but we are hopeful, you know, that there are some communities, especially with our region, that are looking at possible funding scenarios to do large-scale upgrade of the network all at once instead of the piecemeal. Okay, when we're opening up this road, we'll make sure we get it there. You know, we'll getting bit by bit. They wanted to look at different funding scenarios, different project scenarios where that could be possible on a large scale. We'll wait and see how that goes. And then finally, market existing infrastructure. We at Mountain up to this point have a very good infrastructure. We are very much this epicenter of the Silicon Slopes, as they call it. Somebody the other day told me that office square footage is almost the same price at Thanksgiving Point as it is right here in downtown Salt Lake. It's the focal point of a lot of those things, Adobe, Exactware, and they just keep building those buildings. So obviously we want to promote, I think, the collection of commercial broadband data as was mentioned by Brian. We think that could be a very valuable tool to understand that, and then obviously market that data, use that data to market ourselves to technology companies, any companies really, that broadband infrastructure is important to them. So just really in conclusion, I probably took too much time, but we really wanted to, like we said, facilitate the expansion and adoption of infrastructure in our area, and wanted to use this project as a springboard to these conversations that haven't been taking place, that need to be taking place with the local governments and the providers and all those that are part of this project. So with that, I'll leave it. Does anybody have any questions, comments, gripes, jokes? Thank you for your, yes, please.
Well, just a comment, impressive the amount of coordination you've been able to put together in a pretty small time.
Well, luckily we have a lot of great planners, a lot of great staff people in our region, and a lot of people that understand how important this really is. And this was a great opportunity to say, okay, everybody understands how important it is, at least at the staff level. Now let's bring them all together and start the discussion mechanism, however that may be. I think that was the big benefit from this for us, is starting the conversation, and again, like I said, being a springboard to future discussions. Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
Well, I'm just going to say really quickly, I think you've done a great job. I think that you have a really complicated area. There's a lot of stakeholders at the table, and I think that you did a great job managing all of those relationships. And I think that especially one of the things with the associations of governments is you already have a lot of relationships in place. And so we were able to kind of just give it to you. You used your existing network, and you were able to disseminate the information. And I think that was a really successful way to do it. And I think especially, when you were talking about the growth that's going to occur, particularly like down in Utah County, and being prepared for that and having city planners understand how important this issue is so that its future planning efforts go forward, that broadband is considered in the overall strategy, I think is great.
Yeah. Essentially, we kind of looked at it as broadband infrastructure is going to end up very quickly being just like water or sewer. You build a house, you buy a house, you expect all you need to do is plug in. And so that's what we're working towards for sure.
And I think, too, one of the things that came up a lot, too, in your meetings was, new developments, a lot of times, they don't always put, empty conduit when they're building new developments. And if they do that, that gives a lot of times multiple providers an opportunity to serve those households. And communities need to make decisions about, okay, do you want to have competition in your area? Do you want to provide residences that have multiple options, and understanding the consequences of how you plan a community down the road?
Yeah, nobody wants to dig up the road more than once.
Yeah.
Great. Any other questions? Thank you. I'm going to excuse myself if that's okay. I have another meeting to be to, but thank you for your time.
Thanks. Oh, there you are.
I don't have a PowerPoint. My name is Cody Christensen. I'm with the Uinta Basin Association of Governments. If I did have a PowerPoint, it would be similar to what you've seen before here. The Uinta Basin ALG serves 3 counties, Duchesne, Uinta, and Daggett. And the one thing that, as we started meeting, that I found was the disparity between Duchesne, the services in Duchesne and Uinta County and Daggett County. Duchesne and Uinta County has some good coverage, some good services. Daggett County is still lacking. They're kind of up in the corner. They're away from Vernal far enough that they don't have those services yet. So as we were in our meetings, the problems in Daggett were different from the issues in Duchesne and Uinta County. So just a little bit about our region. We are growing as well. A lot of growth in our counties, especially in Duchesne and Uinta counties. We're heavily dependent on the extraction industry, oil, gas, and there's a lot of jobs out there right now. But we are limited in the fact that of our lack of transportation. There's Highway 40 that goes in and out, and that's about all we have. So broadband and communication services are very important to our area. Developing that network for economic development in our area is very important, and everybody sees that. As we were meeting, as we talked about that, the professional, they talked about the importance of good services out there. Just a little bit on our goals. The first goal we talked about in our plan is to promote the education and awareness of the broadband capacity and the utilization in our area. We do have very good service to most of our counties in Duchesne and Uinta, and so the focus is more on education, on where we can use that, how we can use that better. Number two is to promote technology infrastructure, much like Bob just talked about, that policy of developing that infrastructure along with the other utilities as they're going in, as we have development. Promote utilization and adoption of broadband services and other technologies. Basically, just the development of those services as they're put in. Promote economic opportunity and development. Like I said before, the importance of those services to our economic development is in our area. And then utilizing broadband and other technologies to improve public safety. Basically, that collaborative effort between the services and the need for public safety, utilizing what works best as far as getting the message out there when there's an emergency. Just some things going forward. I think it was very apparent as we met and we spoke. There was some good dialogue about collaboration. We had a good diverse group as far as service providers, local elected officials, planners, healthcare, education, and they just get them talking about the importance of that collaboration and that coordination as we develop and move forward in our area. Again, collaboration between the development and the infrastructure with just as far as when you go in to get a building permit, can we have that requirement that you put that infrastructure in for communication, just like you would with water, sewer, anything else. And then that collaborative effort between service providers and emergency personnel to provide that access to public safety. That's about all I had. I think it's really similar to what Brian and Bob have talked about. As I listened to them, I thought we talked about those same things in our meetings. Yeah. So, any questions? Uinta County is about 33, I think. Duchesne's about 16, 18, around there. Daggett County's 1,000.
One of the things that came up in your meeting that I thought was interesting, one of the meetings that you had, you talked a little bit about, providers when they're putting together their plans, because a lot of them do kind of 5-year plans, and one of the things that was suggested was, if the providers want to put together their 5-year plan and then get feedback from the community and say, this is where we're thinking of deploying. Do you think that makes sense for the area? And rather than the community starting to do the planning, I thought it was interesting that there was a suggestion, well, maybe a provider says, okay, where are the needs? This is what we're thinking. This is generally what our rollout is. And maybe then the city says, well, could you maybe prioritize this rollout a little bit different based on what we're hearing? And I think that was something that was new that came up in your meeting that didn't come up in some of the other ones, and I thought it was a good model as well. So.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning, good to be with you. I'm Soren Simonson with Community Studio, and I think we were the only AOG where we actually had a consulting team working with the Association of Government. I want to recognize Denise Davenport, who is the project manager from the Wasatch Front Regional Council, who really guided and shepherded the efforts. Also not with me today is John Jansen, who is a co-consultant with me and did a lot of the outreach work and putting the plan together. So, whoops. So this is just a quick snapshot about 60% of the population of Utah is in the 5 counties that are represented by the Wasatch Front Regional Council. You see, I know the numbers are probably a bit small. About a third of the population is in Salt Lake County, and then between Davis and Weaver, about another 500,000. And then we have the smaller counties of Morgan and Tooele. So really diverse geographically in terms of the different communities that make up the Wasatch Front region. I'll touch on some of the elements that came out of the plan because of that. These are the 5 counties as they sit around the Great Salt Lake. Obviously, the largest land area is Tooele County, although the population of Tooele County is mostly in the Wasatch Front area at the eastern end of the county. Just a quick overview. We were organized back in about August of last year. We put together a regional planning council that had about 30 members, and we tried to cover pretty broad business and industry sectors, and also including some residents. Many of our broadband planning council meetings, we also invited many of the broadband providers. I think there are close to 30, maybe 40 providers in the Wasatch Front region. Many of you are serving this area where population is clustered. We had 2 outreach efforts. We met in all 5 counties back in September, and then we met with all 5 the kind of community-oriented meetings with all 5 counties also in October. And in between that, we also had the Utah Broadband Technology Summit and a dedicated focus group, which I know many of your companies participated in, talk about very provider-specific issues. We met 6 times over the last few months with the Broadband Advisory Council. Of course, here we are today, finalizing the plan with this presentation to you. Very quickly, looks like none of my maps came up.
Sorry.
His plan, could he pull, like, if we went to the regional planning website and we pulled your plan, could you enter map that way? Does that work?
Sorry.
Yeah, pull that up, and then that should pull up. It'll be a little bit out of your order, but.
That's okay.
Okay.
Okay, so this one you've already seen, which is just an overview of the 5 counties. Real quick, we've got just some background and context, maps that kind of show infrastructure of the region. This is a pretty significant map that was used in some of our recommendations. What's shown here are, this corresponds to some planning work that's been going on within the Wasatch Front Regional Council, funded through a federal grant over the last couple of years, which is looking at long-term growth of the Wasatch Front region and where future centers of residential population, employment, and kind of clusters of commercial and economic activity are located along the Wasatch Front. You can see some of that's in Utah County, and MAG was part of that. But for particularly the Wasatch Front counties, you can see a lot of this is clustered around major freeway and highway infrastructure, as well as expanding transit infrastructure, and that becomes kind of significant in some of our recommendations. In the plan, also you see kind of the advertised speeds of broadband, and not surprisingly, most of the maximum speeds, which are in the hotter colors, are located where the population density is. We've got pretty decent wireless coverage even in some of these really remote areas in Tooele County and throughout the Wasatch National Forest area. You still see really pretty good coverage from wireless broadband. And then this was kind of an interesting, one of the things we were trying to get at with our regional council was looking at the cost of broadband. and it's difficult to track that information because of promotions and bundling and lots of different ways that broadband services are packaged. But one of the things that we try to get at is that sometimes competition helps to keep prices in a range that they're affordable. So at the 3 megabit per second service level, you can see really good coverage. This is kind of at the low end of broadband speeds. We had a comparable map looking at kind of the mid-range, which is up to 10 megabits per second. You can see still the highest population density is covered pretty well. The hotter colors mean 4 or more service providers of fixed service. But then you see as we get into the 25 megabit per service, and there was a lot of discussion about what should we have targets, and ultimately we decided not to have targets. But a lot of people are really interested in seeing the future growth and development, looking at how much we can get deployed with 25 megabit and higher service level. And you can see even in Salt Lake County, we dropped down considerably in the number of service providers that can support that higher level. And some areas, particularly in Ogden Valley and in the Morgan County area, they drop almost completely off the map in terms of those higher service levels. So those were some significant findings that came out of this. I'm going to switch back to the PowerPoint show here now.
No.
So these were the 5 areas that came up as our regional priorities and recommendations: infrastructure, demand, economic development, community development, and broadband awareness. And there was a lot of confusion about use of terms. Broadband education, sometimes people were confused about if that means using broadband in education, higher education, elementary and secondary. And so we developed this term broadband awareness as kind of a term that we would use to talk about what people understand about services that are available, service providers, and education focused more on actually learning about broadband, how to use it, as well as using it in education settings. So I'm going to quickly go through each of these. Under infrastructure, a lot of our comments and findings in our needs assessment were similar to some of the other counties. A lot of it revolves around better cooperation, better communication, and collaborating between private sector and regulatory and local government agencies to identify potentially all of the different areas that touched broadband and different ways that they could all help impact and improve levels of service. One of the other things that we also focused on in each of these 5 recommendation areas is there's still a fair amount of divergence between the more highly populated urban areas and rural areas. And even though a lot of the population is clustered on the Wasatch Front and these more dense urban areas, there's still a lot of opportunity and things that can be accomplished in the rural areas. We also had a section in each of these 5 priority areas that focused on future opportunities. Beyond the needs assessment, identifying priorities that are part of this plan, we also wanted to see what are some future areas that could be addressed if additional funding's available, maybe some of the partners, local government, state government, or even private providers can focus on some of their future efforts. So in infrastructure, developing some best practice guides, as a couple of the other speakers mentioned, there's a lot that can happen at the local government area to break down barriers and increase communication, and perhaps having some sort of a guide that helps local governments know where and how to focus their efforts to be most effective, to be useful. Some funding assistance might be worthwhile, especially with companies that are trying to serve these more rural areas where the cost of infrastructure may be cost prohibitive to bring some of the technology there. And then also developing a template for local comprehensive plans. Most of the planning that goes on in Utah is happening at the local government level, either at the state or the municipal level. Very few local governments have, as Bob mentioned, have any sort of element in their comprehensive or general plan in their community that deals with broadband. And so developing some templates for that might be worthwhile, because then communities can begin to address that and have some specific ways to look at how they communicate better how they break down barriers and regulation. On the demand side, a lot of this was focused on adding capacity, addressing redundancy. We talked a little bit about public safety and the fact that in some of the more remote areas, sometimes there's competition, particularly when you get seasonal surges. This isn't so much a problem in the Wasatch Front because a lot of the mountain canyons have pretty good coverage. But often when emergency service personnel are working up there for fire season or responding to accidents and things like that, they're competing for the same bandwidth that is being used sometimes with seasonal surges of people that are recreating. And so that creates some interesting challenges, and developing dedicated networks, which we know is already in the process, is something that we saw as being fairly significant. Future funding opportunities here involve continuing to develop this emergency response network, and also, again, looking at best practice guides for developing partnerships in communities to address demand issues. Under economic development, a lot of our focus here is on those regional centers for future growth and development. The southern part of the Wasatch region is largely built out. Salt Lake County, Davis County, Weber County, although there's still pockets of growth happening. A lot of the growth that we expect in the future will be intensifying urban areas, a lot of infill and redevelopment. And these are good opportunities to expand service. A lot of the infrastructure that's in those places is aging infrastructure, even within data and telecommunications networks. And so looking for opportunities to really focus future efforts in those areas is important. Future funding, again, there were some best practice areas and funding assistance that we highlighted in the plan as areas for future development and implementation of the plan. Community development was the next area, and a lot of what we focused on here was, again, focusing on these enhanced regional centers along highway and transit and other transportation corridors, looking at public access to Wi-Fi, particularly expanding it in public transit as we continue to develop a very effective network of public transit using rail systems. Many of you that have ridden, for example, the commuter rail line know that you have free Wi-Fi available, but you don't get that same service on tracks or on bus service, and so those were areas that we thought we could expand. Also addressing broadband and emergency preparedness plans. So many people use broadband now as almost their exclusive way of communicating. What happens if we have a major seismic event or flood or some other disaster that may take out some of that infrastructure? How do we respond and have communities focused on reestablishing those communication links as a response to an emergency event? Some of the opportunities we see here are continuing to expand public Wi-Fi in community centers, parks and open space, and on public transit, mapping those resources so that local governments have a way to communicate where those facilities are available. And then again, coordinating emergency preparedness plan. The final area that we focused on was broadband awareness. And this is mostly looking at expanding opportunities, improving advertising, which is an area to work with providers. So it's easier for people to compare services and rates, and maybe a better across-the-board comparison. A lot of insurance providers and other things have done this and made it really easy to know what you're getting and what the true cost of the service are. We're interested in seeing greater public awareness about education, especially for some of those individuals that may not have the skills. And in the non-adoption survey that was recently completed, that was a big reason for some of the people that are not using internet in their home, is that they either don't have knowledge of or awareness about how to use the internet specifically, or they don't have a computer or know how to use computer and have a very low literacy rate in technology. So we think, especially in some of the rural areas where we see the higher concentration of people not using that training in schools, libraries.
Hi, this is Gary Zabriskie. I'm either away from my desk or out of the office. If you'll leave a message after the tone, I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks for calling. Goodbye.
Awareness of training, and that may be something that providers can assist with. And then also looking at how you develop maybe a statewide campaign that focuses on the benefits and availability of broadband, including both fixed broadband as well as wireless technology around the state. So if any of you want to contact us for any more information, here's our contact information. I'd be happy to respond to any questions or comments that any of you have.
To continue this recording, press 1. To return to the main menu, press 8. Or, if finished, press the star key and hang up. To continue this recording, press 1. To return to the main menu, press 8. Or, if finished, press the star key and hang up. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. I mean, AGRC, just so that you know, I don't know how many maps they created for these regional plans, but it was in the hundreds. And when you're dealing with that amount of data and trying to come up with maps that somebody that doesn't understand the industry can look at and take something away from, I mean, they worked tirelessly to do maps. And we told the planning teams, we said they'll give you anything that you want, and they gave us extensive lists of maps that they wanted, and AGRC took care of it, and so we're really grateful to them for doing that. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I was going to say also, you know, the Wasatch Regional Council, you know, a lot like Mountain Land, difficult area. It's difficult because you have a huge population. They had a lot of urban areas as well as some rural areas. And when you're trying to, you know, meet with people that have very different viewpoints, you know, it's tough. It's tough to come up with recommendations that people feel good about, that are still valuable. And, you know, so we and them work through a lot of issues that way. But I think that they've gotten to a really good place. I think that their plan, you know, has a lot of really good best practices that I'm sure that we'll use in the future. So that was great. Thanks.
With the Southeastern Utah Association of Local Governments, and that consumes, well, what it takes part of is Carver County, Emory County, Grand County, and San Juan County. So we have very vast geographical distances that we need to cover with really small communities out there. Okay, keep that in mind. Yeah, good luck with that. We got Sewell and Sued. I know. You have to say the whole thing. With our planning council, what we come to talk about was, we thought with this here project, we brought together these three things with the mission as bringing about awareness in broadband services and current infrastructure. And then we encourage local businesses, residents, public officials to work together to bring about broadband into our local areas. We want to promote and strengthen the networking between public and private entities with their broadband providers. I feel like we did this. We got broadband providers on board. They're looking into moving into San Juan County, and so that's a real plus that came out of this. Our key issues come with, of course, the geographical distances. With that, we have unreliable services that make it difficult to sustain and attract those businesses, because we've had businesses that want to come into San Juan County and were taken up by, Ridgefield area because we didn't have that infrastructure there, okay? We have small communities with seasonal high volume tourism. We have folks coming into the region, even from worldwide, and they're used to getting online, looking at their Netflix, looking up their email, downloading an entire movie, and it just takes up a huge amount of bandwidth. So at these little tiny hotels, it takes everything from them. So
Providers like to show me their usage charts, and they like to show me which section is Netflix, and it's usually about half of the network is Netflix right now. So.
Absolutely it is. Marketing campaigns and educating the consumer. This comes about with the providers. The provider kind of put on board, and they said, we don't know how to get those consumers and educate them, so how do we do that? So that was one of the key issues. Because some of them don't know how much bandwidth they should have, and what are they doing? Are they doing gaming, or are they just looking up email? What should they be buying? Our funding challenges, of course, and legislative controls was an issue. And Utah Navajo Nation, sparse population, and their need for a physical address. So some of those things we're not able to really address with broadband, but we'll try to. Recommendations. We have 4 sectors that we're looking at, which is our economic development, of course, education, healthcare, and public safety. And then we have telecommunication providers and their consumers and our local governments. So to look at our economic development, our main issue is to continue our local coordination efforts. So this is what we recommend for it to be continued. We want to, within that sector, is to develop the regional strategies to increase tribal broadband access and also to increase our access to tourism areas. Because that's a livelihood in those small areas. You have a lot of folks that come in seasonal and then they leave and the town just kind of goes to sleep. So we want to support them. Next is our telecommunication providers and consumers together. We want to form that public-private partnership. We want to increase that coordination with them. And this here partnership with them, we want to continue that momentum. I think they like coming to the table. Consumers like to come in and listen to them. We have, Emory Telecom isn't here today, but I'll tell you what, they come in and they really just tell you a lot of information, and the officials love to come and listen to that information. So, also to provide a mechanism for a consumer-provider coordination effort. This here way, they could come to the AOG, or we could put on small trainings for them and help the consumer understand what they really need. So. Next is, we kind of group this together, the education, healthcare, and public safety. Due to, we want to increase that utilization for funding mechanisms, and this here is actually going on. It's not something that needs to be created, but it is going on. So there with that, the association could continue working together with these, with the Utah Broadband Provider Network, which is the project managers up here, to identify facilities that do not currently have broadband, that don't have high-speed internet access, and to educate them on what they really need and what products or what funding sources are available for them. So with the Association of Local Governments, just like any of, as Kelly said in the beginning, we're already divided out there. We have 7 of them throughout the state. We have our regions. I hopefully got out of everybody else's presentations that we already have this network of folks that we know. Even if we have people that change over in official seats, we still know folks that are out there. So we always go out, and when this project come up, it's like, okay, I'm going to ping all these folks that I already know, try to get them on board, and then we'll go out and get new ones out there. So they have that relationship built with us already. So that goes in with the funding sources. So that way with Utah Telehealth Network and FirstNet and UEN, we try to connect those folks with them. And last but not least is our local governments. Of course, I think it was, the broadband deployment, putting our information into those plans, those 5-year general plans, and mentioning broadband. That's what we really want to see happen in each of these planning sectors. So each city has their own little planning groups, and they get together, and if they could mention broadband, and when they open up a street, they want to do some updates on their sewage. The sewage lines, let's put in some conduit in there. So I think you've all heard that once before. Develop strategies to increase that competition. This was a really big issue. There wasn't that competition in southeastern Utah. They got one provider, and they couldn't connect with them. I don't mean to downplay any provider, but it was just from a consumer aspect that they couldn't get the same person twice on the phone. And they'd have issues with their billing, and this is talking from a city's standpoint of view. The cities would call in. And if they could at least get somebody that they could connect with that handles their account every time they call in, that would be really efficient. So else is the developing strategies to utilize funding, local funding, to encourage that infrastructure deployment. So using our local tax dollars. In conclusion, well, networking, of course, provides that greater opportunity to develop our partnerships. With this broadbanding council, we've created a synergy to provide community awareness, and that was really our main goal with this. I have a special mention right here with our success of this plan, with the support of the Governor's Office of Economic Development, the Broadband Project team. Thanks so much for everything you guys have done. Our Public Service Commission, our Department of Technology Services, Automated Geographic Reference Center, and of course our local community input has made this plan successful.
10:55 to 11:05. 10:55 to 11:05. It's now 11.
So with that, questions or comments you have for me?
I called up the UEN and he said,
Carrie, could you please mute?
So a little joke at the end. You can see the dog wants to get on as well.
Really quickly,
Yes, Kelly.
I'm trying to kind of, because I think that there were unique things that happened in all of the regions. And I think particularly Amy Peters and also Emery, one of the things that's been extremely challenging for us as a team is figuring out ways to connect with tribal communities. And, we're not out in those areas. We don't have those existing relationships with the tribes. And I know, I would talk to Amy and she'd be like driving to, reservations and talking to people. And then we went to, she had a planning meeting in Moab a few months ago, and we walked in, and to have, many tribal members at that meeting was a huge accomplishment. And, we've tried to invite tribes to these meetings and getting them, to come. And I think probably because it was a bit closer to, I think was really valuable. One of the things that's happened sort of as a result, she has San Juan County, which is one of our most difficult counties. There's a lot of tribal land. It's difficult to get infrastructure, but based on some of the work that she's done and some of the relationships that we have with particularly the Utah Education Network, there's a group that now is really focusing on that area, bringing together the Utah Education Network, bringing together providers, even bringing together some energy companies, which is something that has not happened before, that are down in that area that have said, we need the service for what we're doing. And so I feel optimistic that something's finally going to happen in that area, probably, hopefully within the next year or two.
I sure hope so. And it seems to be going that way just because we went to the one meeting with the Four Corners. What exactly is the name of it? I can't remember the name of it. It had a lot of energy folks at the table, and they were just, and UEN was a representative. They were just really getting to the facts of what they could do with what they had.
Yeah, and I think too the tribal communities are now starting to really be more open to the idea of, okay, we'd like our chapter houses connected, and there's more of a willingness to talk about going onto some of those lands and getting some infrastructure in place, and I feel more optimistic about that area. Just seeing the group that's gotten together is the right group of people to start working on that issue. So.
Well, thank you.
And both UEN and UDOT have both been very valuable to this process. I don't think that they've been totally mentioned, but UDOT and UEN have attended a lot of the regional meetings, and they both have really good models for implementing infrastructure, and they've been able to share a lot of information with our teams. So, Emery?
My name is Emery Coley-Lomina. I'm from 6th County Association of Governments. The first thing I want to do is just thank everybody. Kelly, Jesse, Amy, and then my peers over here. There's a joke that I say that we wear, my Navajo name is wearing many hats. I think it's not too many hats. And who was it that mentioned that, that some things come down to get up and just do the project, and these guys have helped me out a lot. So I didn't do this on my own, and Amy was a great peer, and she helped me out. I talked to Ellen from Mountain Land, so I could not do this on my own. And the mapping part of it was, and then I looked at it, I made a great map. Our area covers about 17,000 square miles and 49 communities. We had a turnover about 50% on our elected officials. As we speak, another mayor is resigning, folks, and that's out in the uttermost area of 6th Town on the east side, Haynesville. How many of you know where Haynesville is? It's way out there, and it's hard keeping track of them. And then in the past 3 months, we just had another change in the town of Koshium in Sevier County. We had 3 mayors, and I have not contacted the new mayor. We're working on a natural resources project, and we traveled through Sevier County into Pioneer County down into Otter Creek. And in our plan, if you bring that up, I have a group of people from Rocky Ridge with Evan Curtis and the state planning staff. A few years ago, we were sending them on the GPS. Our area is so sparse that in Wayne County, I think there's 1 person per square mile. Stampede had about 18 individuals per square mile, and Sevier County around 12. So it averages out probably about 68 people per square mile. So when we talk about 6-county region, we're either wilderness or remote. And we have 2 tribes within or 2 bands of the Paiute tribe within our region. And they are providing, I keep seeing health up there. Kanash and the Koshium band, they have a health center. And we need to just probably connect with them more. Our process was, we told the council, we had Elliot Yazzie from the Koshium band was on our council. And it is really difficult to connect with the tribes. And I lived through that in October. We visited 5 nations. We started out with the Paiute tribe of Utah, went to Kaidat, High Springs. We went to the San Juan, Pauli, and the Navajo Nation and the Hopi Nation. Education, the awareness that we've seen up there, especially in Broadband, which is not there. But the collaboration and the cooperation and the coordination, those are some big words that sometimes we do not understand. And so through this process, we got our things as we were moving forward with this. And our process was to meet each and every one of those 49 communities. We met with the council, we went through our SWOT analysis, and we come up with 3 key issues. There's some dead spots, the funding is not there, and then we need to take advantage of the opportunity to grow with our ISP providers. Our chair is from Denison Telephone, Commissioner Scott Bernal, and then Centralcom was represented on the council. And what we come up with was three key issues was to improve speed, reduce dead spots, expand existing technology, and then help secure infrastructure funding. When we met, I do have the raw data on our files if anybody wants to go through that, all the comments that we have. In our plan, we see it in a matrix format. We pull it up and we act on affordable housing, police protection, all the way down on land use, sewer system, water main, and then we have that broadband question. Each meeting, probably 1.5 hours to 2 hours we sat with the group. And some of the county commissioners attended the meeting. Claudia Judge, she sits on the CID board. And so with their help and their input, I think we had a lot of good credibility our vision, I'll just read that to you, that we are going to provide direction and leadership in a manner that will enhance the capability of local leaders and citizens to plan. And this is an intricate part of it. We host a leadership summit every year in April. And I referenced the broadband project when we gathered. We had about 90 individuals, so mayors, local leaders, and then the tribal leaders. Now, you guys can come to that one too. But it was in April. You had your meeting on the 24th of April.
Yeah.
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 But the three goals that we'll be working on is develop and maintain a positive broadband environment to support economic development. In Wayne County, it's tourism based. And there's been some debate on is tourism economic development or is it just some kind of service industry. But we need to have broadband access for them so they could advertise maybe worldwide, nationwide, and statewide. And the way that we will inform, we have some evaluation considerations on that provide broadband training for local officials, community leaders, county planning commission, and economic development. As we speak, we have a group called the technical committee, and there are 6 individuals from each county. And they are meeting in Juliet County, Havasu County, and Russell County next weekend. And so the coordination that we have is there. So when we pull this thing together, and he came out for a meeting a couple of times, right? The second goal that we have, let me mention the agriculture. I'm not a farmer, but they use that GPS leveling, I think, and then their market. So we're going to see if we can expand on that in the future. I think that's going to use this iPad. I'm going to have to tell you a joke. My wife is just really just a non-techie. And then one of my daughters put her on Facebook. She's from the Navajo tribe, and she's always telling me Navajo jokes that she's connected with her. And one of the jokes that came out of it was like maybe somebody might answer this. What did the buffalo say to his son when he went to college? Anyway. It's coming from my wife. That's why I just laugh about it. But my son. My son. She has other Navajo thinking. Yeah. Goal number 2, to assist on local business and public safety. What happened was when we went into Mayfield, and his a retired corrections officer, the mayor, John Christensen. And before we even spoke, he said, "You guys need to do something about our cell service. Just up 12-mile roadway up into the skyline, there's no cell service. We could kill somebody." And so when we talked to Cal, maybe we could strategically do something with cell towers. Eureka, they had nothing there. 0. Then who knows where Remington is? You know where Remington is. And as we interviewed all of these communities, each one of them had a specific complaint. The ISP provider, certain ones, they're not willing to work with them. The Noshtown, that guy was a real feisty dude. He just told us that, that dang, I don't want to use these words, that dang guy, and then these guys come in, and lo and behold, my monthly rates went down as soon as they saw competition coming in. So this is a good thing that we're doing. And I learned a lot from it. These guys taught me a lot. And Brian, he was going to be my wingman today. So chime in if I'm going off base. And so support Ross the last one up, I'm just gonna go through this real quickly. We have an underserved, we keep talking about LMI, but there's, the minority population is growing in our area. And we have a big problem with teachers. This is the Indian school children. They don't do their homework. Up above Joseph on the west side, that's the Pursuit reservation. I call it the rock pile. They don't have any type of wireless up there, so the kids, they're falling behind their classmates. And so about 5 years ago, even before this was incoming, we created a North American support system. So I think it was NRCS gave us some laptops, and then this was the public library gave us room to houses, so they had tutors down there. But the transportation wasn't a problem. At this point, bookmobile, the mayor of Scipio, he was trying to get a CRT grant. He doesn't even own a computer. He has that CD that is handshake. He still does his application back then. And we needed to get on the internet, and the bookmobile was stopped about a couple of blocks. So let's walk down there and see if they can help us out. So our bookmobiles, they're still out in the area. They're providing good service here. So the last part was the minorities, and we will start doing awareness training, especially with the tribe. I'm just going to read something here that the digital divide in the remote areas of this region further challenges public health, aging, transportation, education, and most of all our quality of life. But also part of this, I looked at here, about 87% do not know who our ISP providers are.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
Any questions? I probably ran hold on, and I don't even know what the time is.
You're good. You're great.
Okay.
Yep.
All right,
We have
thanks.
plenty of time. Okay, so our last one, Levi Roberts. I think I finally know the difference between 5 county and 6 county. That's been our challenge.
Yeah, at our, I think it was our
Keeping
APA
those two
conference, they called him 5 county, but, so, and actually the title of our plan, we called it Southwest Utah Regional Plan, because we figured people don't really know what 5 county is. And so this is the part of the state that we represent, southwest corner of Utah. Population is a little over 200,000, and the majority of the population resides in St. George and Cedar City area, with several small communities, dispersed throughout. In our process, I just wanted to note that, in addition to involving various industry sectors, we had very good, strong involvement from our local ISPs. The CEOs of several of the ISPs were on our Regional Broadband Planning Council and helped this come about, from South Central Communications, InfoWest, Baja Broadband, and Skywire. They were all very well represented and were probably the most instrumental in bringing this together. So I just wanted to point out a few of the key challenges and opportunities that we identified. One is that the status of broadband internet, it stifles economic development in some areas while providing great opportunities in others. Just kind of a case in point, in Kane County, you're probably aware of where Kanab is. If you're headed down toward the Grand Canyon on Highway 89, you go through Kanab. Kanab has very good broadband service, and this has helped them locate a call center there. They have some high-profile home-based businesses that would normally work in big cities, but like the scenery of southern Utah, that are located there. But to the east of there in Big Water, as you can see there, fixed broadband service is pretty much non-existent. and that's just north of Page. And we had a representative from Big Water on our Regional Broadband Planning Council, and she was a realtor, and she would like to work in Big Water, but she's not able to, so she has to go to Page to operate her realty business, even though it's, you know, based in Kane County there, and that's about 20 miles south of Big Water. There were a lot of horror stories that we got from our survey out of Big Water of people that weren't able to access the internet there. The population there is about 500, but they have a lot of seasonal visitors. It's a gateway to Lake Powell. Another issue is working with federal land managers. The vast majority of our region is owned by federal land, so servicing the rural areas in particular, you do need to cross these public lands. But the ISPs mentioned how difficult and cumbersome this process was. And then the demand for more data in various industries is increasing exponentially, and providers are finding it difficult to meet the demand in some of these areas. Cooperation between public and private sector, we notice that it does improve overall service, and is working better in some areas than in others. So here's the list of goals that we came up with. Proliferation of a variety of options for affordable, reliable, high-speed residential internet service, redundancy and higher bandwidth in industrial areas, business parks, and other potential sites for businesses. We found that even in St. George and Cedar City, a lot of the business parks didn't have the redundancy to attract some of the businesses that they would like to. And our economic development professionals are communicating with the ISPs to kind of ramp up service there. Increased bandwidth in schools, libraries, hospitals, and public access sites to accommodate greater data usage, and improve cooperation between ISPs and government entities to expand network of broadband infrastructure. The priority recommendations that we came up with found that the broadband mapping tool is a great tool for businesses coming into the area, but we need to proliferate information about this tool, and we thought that working with the economic development professionals so they can refer the prospective businesses to this to show them, you know, what speeds are offered in different locations. That just happens to be my address in St. George there, so you see I've got quite a few options. But, development of detailed broadband plans for local jurisdictions. This was mentioned in other presentations. This is a gap in our comprehensive plans that we think it needs to be addressed at the local level to detail their involvement. Enhanced broadband database to include available infrastructure and project schedules. St. George City actually takes a good inventory of project schedules, and they notify internet service providers when they're digging in the road. And we thought that, you know, across the region, if this could be available for internet service providers, they can provide it at a lower cost. Improving coordination with UEN to expand broadband access and capacity, not only for education, but in partnering with businesses and with local communities, particularly in rural areas. This is something that they're actually doing in Big Water to obtain better internet access there. More recommendations. Refine grant policies to provide broadband service for small providers in rural and isolated areas. Some of our ISPs mentioned that it's difficult, the grant requirements are sometimes difficult to meet the requirements to provide service in rural areas. One of them mentioned that for one grant they were applying for, one of the prerequisites was to provide service to everyone in the census tract. Well, in some of our rural areas, there's 2 census tracts in the whole county, so it's really difficult to meet those requirements. So, tweaking some of those requirements with these rural, and we call them frontier lands, the hinterland out beyond the rural areas. We felt that it would be helpful if there was some kind of state liaison program for cooperating with public land managers, so that ISPs, when they need to meet with these individuals, they can come with someone that's a little bit more service friendly to them, to help them jump the hoops in working with public land managers. Removing barriers and supporting the private sector to lead the charge to expand the broadband infrastructure. And on our council, that was a focus, a consensus that the private sector should continue to lead the charge on this, but the public sector needs to work on removing some of the barriers that are in the way of them providing services. And then ongoing regional broadband coordination. We did develop some good partnerships in our planning process, but moving forward, we're not really sure where that's going, so we think ongoing regional coordination is needed. And it sounded like Bragg had they're continuing to meet, and that could be a good model for our region as well. So that's it.
Thank you. And just, to comment on your region, 2 of the things you brought up, the St. George example. St. George, I think some of the things that they're doing as far as, notifying providers, I think it's a great model for other areas to look to. I think it's paid off if you look at how many providers are in the St. George area. I had a few months ago, Spencer Eccles came into my office, which he doesn't do a whole lot, but came in and said there's a company, they want to find out what kind of fiber access they can get. And so they called me, and I was able to look on the map, and I said, oh, you probably, I think you have 3 different options. I called a few companies. One of them said, we have a fiber line right across the street from the building. And the guy that I was talking to, he was from another state, and he was like, I cannot believe that there's a fiber line next to our facility in St. George, Utah. And he said, we have facilities in several states, and he's like, that's a really big deal, because we could potentially do things in the St. George location that we won't be able to do in 2 of our other facilities. And I just think that St. George has, is an example of an area that's kind of decided what they want. They've worked with the private sector, and they've been able to get some really great options. Also, the Big Water example, we had Heather Rankin come to the meetings, and she came to our broadband summit in the fall and just kept talking to people about Big Water, and that kind of sparked a conversation with UEN, and UEN said, actually we're just connecting the school with a microwave connection, and so that now there's a little bit of conversation. We've had 1 or 2 providers talk about Big Water, and so hopefully within the next year or so, they'll be able to upgrade their services. But these planning teams have helped highlight areas, San Juan County, Big Water, and they've drawn attention to specific areas, and then people have kind of banded together to help solve problems. And so you've had some really great conversations in your meeting. You've had some people that have some great experience. So yeah, thank you. You've done a great job.
Thank you.
And thanks to all the providers and members of our advisory council that have attended the regional meetings, especially a lot of the providers in rural areas have been really good at just educating the coordinators on a lot of the technical details. They've been able to really advise them on how to move forward. And so I think it was really good that we really pushed our teams to get the providers in the room and to make sure that they were coordinating. With that, does anybody have any questions? Does anybody have any updates? I know that we actually have a few minutes. We can end early, that's fine, but we have a few minutes. I don't know if anybody has any updates that they'd like to give. We tried to kind of make the meeting just solely focused on regional planning. So, and one thing that I wanted to note, we in the regional plans, we've included the regional sections for the non-adopter demand study. We just barely, within the last few days, were able to get those regional analysis together for the plan. So we were yesterday taking their regional plans, putting in portions of the demand survey, and then we will work with our team at Utah State to get the full demand survey report. But I think that, so the demand survey, we did a survey of the state about 2 or 3 years ago, and we were asking people about their adoption levels for broadband, and that was part of the discussion that we had when we were deciding what we wanted to do with our funding. And we determined that the numbers of non-adopters were really low in the state, and so we decided with our second survey, rather than just asking the whole state, are you adopting the internet? What we did was we said, okay, we want you to talk to just the people that are not using the internet. And it's really interesting that it was pretty hard to find people in Utah that don't have home broadband. And so we've mentioned this figure a few times, but I think it's staggering. They had to call 27,000, they had to make 27,000 calls to find 500 respondents that would finish, a survey, people that said, I don't have a home broadband subscription, and, I'll talk to you about why I don't have the internet in my home. And so the demand survey is the results. And so we found just generally the non-adopters come from all sorts of age ranges, all sorts of income ranges, and there was a large portion of them that just said, I'm not interested in having it in my home. But at the same time, a large percent said, if I had training, then I would be more likely to adopt the internet. And then we kind of tried to look at each region, and as much as we could. It's hard with that kind of survey sample when you're having to make that many calls to get, a large survey sample for each region, but we've kind of done what we can with it, and at least given some indication on a regional level of what's going on with not adoption. So I think probably at the next meeting, we'll have copies of the demand study, and hopefully we'll have Ryan Yonk come and talk about it a little bit more and answer questions. Do we have anything else?
Again, I'm from the a lot of what we do is a lot of just a couple of things that were mentioned from two of the plans. They talked about telehealth. Just a reminder that the Utah Telehealth Network was rolled under our umbrella this last legislative session, so that is now part of our organization in the process of becoming single organization entity, and moving along very well with that process. But when we talk telehealth, we are now the Utah Education Telehealth Network. That's our official title. So we've expanded so much that we can now do telehealth again. I heard talking about the guy in San Juan, or excuse me, San Juan area. We did get a big impact for grant where we are going to refresh those microwave systems we had down in San Juan and in Daggett. So we should be able to increase capacity quite a bit in those two areas. And then I had the opportunity to go to back and testify with the FCC with some other state network directors. I just used the term the Four Corners Project, and talked about how we were working with Navajo Oil and Gas, University of New Mexico would really like to be able to have a link directly from New Mexico into Utah to take broadband
may run, the agencies have been rolled together, but I know in the past we've heard from what was at UEN about that their goal was to be in every single K-12 school in the state. What are the criteria in terms of which type of health facilities that would now be the goal? Is it hospital level clinic? How do you determine where to go?
Right now, they're in 60 locations, so they're connected to 60. If you were to lay our infrastructure map, we're in anywhere there's a public school or a library or a university or higher ed institution, that's where our infrastructure reaches out to. As you talk about health network, you lay that on top, and they're in the same communities that we are. And so the ability to expand is only restricted by the funding that we have to be able to make capacity. And so they want to connect with clinics, with hospitals throughout all and if you think of all of the sites that are in the state, and to only have 60 sites, there's so much room for expansion to reach out. And I feel like that when people are saying, well, how does telehealth fit in with education? There is such a strong educational component with the telehealth network that it's not uncommon in other states to see an education network, research and education network also provide connectivity for telehealth. So it's not an unknown model. We're not blazing new territory. We're just seeing that there's some redundancy or duplication that we don't really need to have. So we're going to combine the infrastructure over time. And that organization, we now have 2 hospital representatives on our board to help give us some insight there. One from a rural hospital, one from an urban hospital. And we also have a second advisory committee. We have the Educational Advisory Council. We also now have the Telehealth Advisory Council. So they will then be funneling their recommendations to our overall board, and that's how we'll get that. But the criteria specifically, I know that they're on a subscriber basis. So if the clinic wants to subscribe to be part of the telehealth network or now UEN, they would just simply apply and pay for services.
Okay. All right. Does anybody have any other updates or things that they wanted to bring up? So I think we're planning, we haven't picked a date yet for the August meeting. Usually we do have it already set, but as soon as we know, we might just send out a quick save the date email just so that you know, because usually you know what the date's going to be. And then at the next meeting, we'll be talking about the demand study for sure, and then probably a few other things. So yeah, with that, thank you for coming. Thank you again to all of our regional planning teams. You guys all really stepped up, and all of the plans are online right now. We just put them on the website this morning. They're on if you go to resources and regional planning, that page, we have just links to all of the plans. But we also, we're going to be doing printed copies. So each region will get a stack of their plans. But we also, just in the corner of the room on the table, if you know that you want copies of any of the plans or of all of the plans, just write down your information, and then we'll make sure that we get it to you at the next meeting. And I think that's all that we have. So thank you. Good job. How's it going? Good. How are you? Good. I just got back from Europe. Oh, fun.
No, I think it's good to have
A plan.
a plan and other stuff to do.
Well, you still have to do the You're like the one that's not done. You'll get there. It'll be interesting. I hope these players. Yeah, that'd be really, yeah. Because you always hear from the loudest person, but sometimes